Alright, so actually a couple of people have asked me to do a little video on how to tune a snare drum. Well, basically, it's pretty much the same process, but a little bit more detailed that you go through with a regular drum. So, I've sort of prepared this drum that I have, because I have a gig coming up too, and I want to change the head, so it's kind of convenient, as the church lady would say. So, basically the first thing you do is throw away the head. I like to get rid of all the sawdust and crap inside that collects over the years. So what we have here is a nice wooden birch PDP, which is the little brother of DW. It's the same company, I believe. Pacific Drum and Percussion. I think that's what it stands for. So first things first, we got to make sure the bottom head is in tune. So you can either take, if I was really trying to do a good job, I'd just take the snare right off. But what I did was I just turned it off, and I'm just holding it off the head so I can... Okay, so that sounds pretty good, and it's fairly tight, but not really, really tight. And again, when you first start tuning it, you want to have it so that the snares are off, because you don't want anything to sort of pervert your ears while you're trying to get the tones right. So what I usually do is here, I'll raise this up a little bit so you can see it. Okay, so you put it on the stand, basically. Grab your new head. Put it on nice. Make sure it's seated. Get your rim. And proceed to finger tighten all the bolts. Doesn't really matter what pattern you go in. And one thing that makes the snare a little bit different than most toms is that, you know, there are way more bolts on a typical snare, usually 10 or 12. If you had to buy a cheap snare or you have a little piccolo, maybe you have only 8. But usually there's 10 in my experience, 8 or 10. So this particular snare has 8 bolts. I've almost got all the lugs, the lug bolts finger tight. A couple of them are a little stubborn, so I'm using the key even though they're not even down to the head yet. Don't happen to have any bolt grease with me, so I'm going to have to just work them in. And okay, so now they're all finger tight. So again, kind of just push down on the middle of the head, seat it, exactly the same process. So now I start tightening alternately in the kind of star pattern that we did with the toms. Same, like I said, it's the same basic process, but we're looking for different thing than just the drum being in tune. Because with a snare drum, you can look for vastly different tones and textures and sounds than you would on a tom. Toms I tend to let ring at their natural resonance. You got a lot more leeway on a snare drum for playing around with the tone, okay? So the tuning and the actual note of the drum. So it's still, I got the snares off. I'm going to see how, if it's just in tune just now. Okay, so this one is out of tune and this one is out of tune. So let's just tighten those up a little bit. Okay, so let me just put the snare microphone back on so you can hear a little better what it actually sounds like. Okay, so that's a reasonable sound snare drum. Now, it's very low though, okay? So if I turn the snares on, it's a snare drum, and it sounds like a snare drum, and you can get a little bit of a roll going. You can get a little bit of the snarey sound, but to my ears, it might do a good job if you're playing a rock in a rock setting, and you wanted a really thick, fat backbeat. But for my personal, tastes, I tune mine a lot higher. So what I'm going to do is just go through, and I'm going to turn each one half a turn. 1, 1. And since I'm going to do them all half a turn, it doesn't really matter what order I'm doing it in. That one was a lot looser. Okay, so now turn the snares back off again. Still pretty much in tune, but a little higher. Okay, so now it's sounding a little bit more like your traditional snarey sounding drum, but it's still pretty low. And it's still got a thick backbeat, but it's a little faster decay. So it doesn't have a after you hit it. So as it gets tighter as a snare drum, the faster you hit it, the faster that snare decay you want to be, because then the crisper the notes are. Now to me, it still sounds a little fat, a little bit sloppy, and the snares are a little bit muddy when you're playing double strokes and fast rolls.